This is a story from Australia. It's called When the Water Disappeared. Long ago in Australia lived a huge bullfrog, and he had the most tremendous thirst. He simply couldn't get enough water. He slurped up all the lakes and he swallowed down all the streams, and quite soon the whole land was completely dry, and all the animals and birds and fish were parched and dried up, with their fur dropping out and their tongues lolling about and their eyes bulging, the little fish flopping about in the mud at the bottom of the dried-up pools. The bullfrog had grown bigger and bigger because he was so full of water. He looked as if he was going to burst. He was so greedy that his mouth was full to the brim, and he had to keep it tight shut, otherwise the water would have come gushing out. How disgusting he was! Now, the animals were very worried about the situation, and they called a meeting. "What are we going to do?" they said. "Because if we don't do something, we're going to die of thirst." "I know," said the wombat. "Let's have a concert, and then we'll get all the animals to be as funny as they can to try to make the bullfrog laugh so that the water will come out of his mouth." "That's a splendid idea," they all agreed. "That is what we shall do." So they held auditions. The animals were very funny. First came the kookaburra. Now, the kookaburra is a bird who makes a very strange sound, a loud cackling laugh that goes on and on. It's really quite enough to make you laugh your head off when you hear him. He also tells very funny jokes. Well, he got up on the platform in front of all the animals, and he soon had them simply shrieking with laughter till the tears were rolling down their faces. "Oh, yes, you will do simply splendidly for the concert," they shouted. "Jolly good, well done." And then the kangaroo had a wonderful act with an emu. The emu bent down, and the kangaroo played leapfrog over him. The emu had such a worried look on his face. He thought he was going to be squashed. The other animals had to laugh at him. Well, they all did their bit, and very funny they were too. "Good, good," they said. "Now we must send an invitation to the frog and get him to come to the concert. We'll hold it tomorrow night as soon as the moon rises." The following night the stars were twinkling in the sky, and the moon rose big and pale like a spotlight for their stage. The ground began to tremble, and the huge bullfrog arrived in the theatre that they'd made out of stones. He was so huge by now that he could hardly walk. His webbed feet were spread out flat. His great body shook and gurgled with the water, and the warts on his back trembled like jellies. He was quite unable to speak, of course, so he just sat and blinked at the animals in a lazy, full-up sort of way. The concert began. The performers were exceedingly good. But you know, the bullfrog had absolutely no sense of humour. He just wouldn't laugh. He didn't think it was funny. He just sat there, the ground shaking under him a little as the water inside him lapped and sloshed about, while he sighed gently to himself. The animals by now were so worried they couldn't laugh any more. They were really desperate. Suddenly, there was a disturbance in the audience. The eel had arrived from goodness knows where. Of course, he'd come slithering and creeping under the seats, as is the wont of eels. "What's all this about?" he said. He could hardly speak because he was so short of water. His voice was very dry. "Well," said the animals, "we're trying to make the bullfrog laugh to get the water out of him, but he doesn't like our jokes and he doesn't like our tricks, and we're afraid the whole event is a complete failure." "Oh," said the eel, "don't you worry about that. Wait till he sees me dance." "Oh, you can't dance," said the kangaroo. "You haven't got any feet." "Now wait and see," said the eel. He slithered his way onto the platform, leaving a little trail in the sand. When he got on the stage, by the beaming light of the moon, he suddenly began to wiggle and wriggle and slither and slide and bend and curve and coil and twist and dance such a wonderful and fantastic fandango, tying himself in loops, in bows, in reef knots. You couldn't tell which was his head or which was his tail. As a finale, he stuck his tail halfway down his throat and bowled along like a hoop. The bullfrog's eyes began to twinkle. The bullfrog began to shake. His great sides heaved, his great lips trembled, and suddenly he began to giggle and gurgle and splutter, and whoosh! His mouth opened and he let out a great ha ha, and an ocean of water lips. The animals flung themselves. They splashed about, they washed themselves, they drank, they swam, they sported and floundered about in the cool, blessed water. And from that time, the lakes and pools and streams were never dry again. As for the bullfrog, no one ever saw him again. He left the theatre in disgust. Perhaps he found another land and drank the water there. Or perhaps he has begun to like seawater and lives in a cave at the bottom of the ocean.